Great job, Alex and Dan. Let's give them another round of applause. All right, this next panel will be focused on proactive cyber operations. Joining me on stage will be Jennifer Gase, Deputy CISO of CIA, and Ashley Rush, President of Praxis Engineering. Let's give them a warm welcome. Well, Jen, Ashley, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really looking forward to digging in on the topic of proactive cyber operations. I know you're both experts in this and really looking forward to understanding how you play into it and what your insights are. So once again, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
So let's start by sort of defining the landscape of that topic, proactive cyber operations, and really kind of dig in to start off with how things within the government have changed in recent years to support the opportunity to lean a little left and be a little bit more proactive. Jen, I'm going to come to you from the CIA side first, if that's okay.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for having us this morning. I think a couple of things have changed. We've talked a lot this morning about the shift from compliance to looking really at the threat and looking at threat data and looking at our proactive capabilities from pen testing to hunting to looking at threat-informed priorities and how we're prioritizing CVs and doing things. And I think that's probably the most significant shift. So before coming over to our cyber defense organization, I spent most of my career in enterprise IT. And I can tell you, cybersecurity was an after-the-fact compliance exercise that we dreaded. And we didn't see the value in it. It seemed like a paperwork exercise that was creating shelfware to sit on a shelf. And I can tell you, too, we were measuring ourselves by that paperwork on a shelf several years ago. And I think the biggest thing that's changed is that shift. But I think what's changed that shift is just people waking up and starting to care. I think 10 years ago, I don't know if people outside of this room, even engineers and developers who are building IT for some of our most sensitive systems, things in my organization, things across the government, I don't know how much they truly understood the threat and cared. And then Sony got hacked. And then Salt Typhoon happened. And I think I can give a lot of thanks, I guess, to the North Koreans and the Chinese and the kid in the basement who's just scrolling through Git repositories for a password. But it woke everybody up. And I think that wake-up call is actually something that we needed as an industry to shift the focus, to say what really matters, what are we really trying to defend against, and how are we positioned to defend against that. And we've heard a lot about that today, a lot about looking at what can our adversaries do, how do we have resiliency, how do we have defense in depth. But I think now, in the last several years, we've shifted the priority of what our organizations are doing to focus more on that. Compliance is still a big deal. We still have federal policies that we have to meet and mandates that we have to meet. But now we have a workforce that's paying attention. We have a workforce that understands what our adversaries are capable of and is working actively to build systems that have that defense in depth and baked in cyber. And I think that's going to be, and it is now and will continue to be transformational.
Ashley, I saw you nodding along, so I'm sure you have something to share there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, completely agree. And I think the key word there is the priority. So as we saw, and we talked about in a couple of panels ago, the shift to acknowledge cyber as the fifth domain, what that really has done is allow industry, the talent pipeline, and of course the government to explore that as a priority. And so with that comes the ability for industry to make investment, to drive innovation, and to drive that as how we want to grow our workforce.
So it's interesting. I'm glad you're sort of sharing that demand signals growing. I'm curious how this is happening in practice, and how is threat intelligence really being used not just to detect but to anticipate and disrupt adversaries before something reaches the level of an incident. That seems very difficult, and in practice it may be harder than in theory. But I'm curious, what does that look like, and how is that actually happening?
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of when we talk about intelligence, several years ago, it really looked more like a list of indications of vulnerabilities and compromise. And that's very important, but obviously that's inherently reactive. And so as we've begun to incorporate advanced analytics, AI tools, and just continue to grow, again, the talent and the size of the workforce, what we've really been able to do is instead use actionable intelligence to help the threat hunters and, of course, the intel operators to be more proactive.
Jen, can you share from a CIA perspective?
Yeah, so Chris said earlier, like 40,000 vulnerabilities this year, right? Like when you talk about the numbers, you talk about the landscape, the diversity of the tech offerings that we have across major enterprises that have existed for years and years now. I think what's made the difference for us in really operationalizing it is how did we make that real for the teams who are building IT for us? And I think this is really relevant, especially for GDIT and others, because a lot of you are staffing the teams that are building IT for the government. And how do you take a number in the close to 300,000 CVEs and help a team understand where they need to focus? What ones are not only adversaries taking advantage of in the wild, which one are adversaries taking advantage of against the US government? And so how do we blend all of that threat data around not just the number of vulnerabilities, but how do you combine that with the technology that's being used, the version of the technology that's being used, the actual risk of that exploit being taken advantage of, and the potential impact of it, if it is. And so for us, what's made the biggest difference is helping to break that down and visualize that so an individual system that's being built for our organization knows what vulnerabilities may or may not exist in their environment and has a path to remediate. And so I think that's kind of critical. We all live in the, there's lots of big tools and capabilities, but the ones that work the best are the ones that are actually deployed and the ones that the people building the systems know how to action on. And so for us, that's been the biggest, I think, shift in our ability to get ahead of the risk.
You brought up a lot of great points, and I think it'll feed nicely into my next couple questions. You mentioned sort of that role with industry, and it's a partnership. You can't just be in this silo where government's doing everything. You rely on your industry partners, both for intelligence sharing, but also that backbone IT that you need. So let's advance that a little bit in terms of the role that public-private partnerships play in enabling early warning and proactive defenses. What does that look like right now?
I mean, for us, and I think for across the government, we have incredibly complex teams that are made up of both staff and contractor workforces who are building and delivering IT and who are securing our IT. We also, as you all know, we led the effort to bring a multiple cloud universe to the intelligence community. And so we have teams that are highly integrated, and when we look at where we have vulnerabilities, where our pen testers are finding things, it's the same stuff we're finding everywhere else. It comes down a lot of times to the humans knowing how to configure the cloud environments, to the humans knowing how to properly protect their passwords so that they're not in an open GitHub or an S3 bucket that's public. I mean, those are the kind of common sense things that I think all of you can help with too, as you're staffing and empowering your teams to come back into our space and build IT and secure IT for us. How do we have that mindset across every single developer, engineer, and cyber practitioner that's coming in, so they're thinking that way, they're understanding what the adversaries are doing, and we are building teams across industry and government that are thinking cyber first, not cyber after the fact that we thought about kind of 10 years ago.
Ashley, you're the industry member on this panel. What's the opposite look like as you work with the government?
Yeah, I mean, I think to Jennifer's point, it comes down to the individual as much as it does to the government, right? And so no one is going to be successful if we go at this alone. This is a problem of scale. We're not just fighting nation-state actors. We're going back to the person in the basement and multi-layered campaigns. And so what it's going to take for us to be successful is a similar mindset. So industry is often the place where we first see those threats because they're not just targeting government agencies, they're not just targeting soldiers somewhere like traditional warfare, they're targeting all of our companies. And so we have already seen so much success in partnerships between industry and the government with providing that intel, with working together and really collaborating and opening ourselves up like we've never seen before because we all take this threat so seriously and know that it's necessary to be successful.
Jen, a couple moments ago, you mentioned the tools, the technology, the IT side of things, and you said that you need the people to know how to use it. But I'm curious, from the tech standpoint, what are some of those tools and technologies that are proving most effective for helping shift this from reactive to proactive?
The ones that are actually deployed in our environment are probably, so there's a lot of great stuff in industry. And I think for us, especially in the regulated environments, a lot of times there's a step to get the cutting edge technology over and into our space. And so I think one of the priorities we have in the digital directorate that Dan runs, that I help to support, is how do we bring things in more quickly and effectively into our environment. We do have a wide range of tooling. We talked earlier about there's an optimization there, right? You can't have everything. It's cost prohibitive. It's too complex. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. So I know in our organization, we rely on a pretty diverse set of tools, but the ones that are the most effective are not just the ones there and running, but the ones that the technical teams are able to easily and seamlessly integrate with. And I think, again, that comes back to the role that a lot of our vendor partners play as key integrators, is how do we get the tools and systems being built to integrate into the cyber tooling that's providing us the telemetry to really understand the risk. And those, for me, like that key role is what's absolutely most important. It's not necessarily the tool in the tech stack, because there's brilliant things out there, but if our technologies can't integrate with it, if we don't have cleared folks who know how to operate it, it's not going to add the same level of value. So for us, that's what's really moving the needle, is the technology we can get in space, and coming once again to the people who can engineer, deploy, integrate it, and optimize the data coming from the tooling.
Super important. Ashley, any thoughts on the technology side of things?
Yeah, I mean, so again, because we're going to make this joke at every panel, the obvious answer is AI, right? But to Jennifer's point again, I would say really what's critical, and there's no place that it's going to be more prevalent than that, is our ability to use those tools and to use those tools in our environments. And so to not spend too much time talking about AI, I will say that the other aspect of it is the tool of our people, of our resources, making sure that they are keeping up with technology that is moving very quickly in private industry, which is something that we are, going to have to pivot in order to be able to do. And so from both an industry and a government focus, the key there is, again, prioritizing and understanding where we're moving next so that we can make sure the workforce is ready and able to support.
So one concept that I find incredibly interesting is really that need to balance speed and accuracy. There's a lot of risk in that middle there, and on either side. So I'm curious, how do agencies like the CIA or others think about that when you need to be accurate, but you also want to move quickly in today's really dynamic environment? Jen, we can start with you, and then Ashley, we can come back.
Yeah, I think not all technology is the same. Not all mission use cases are the same. So there's areas where you can move fast and break things, and there's 100% areas where you can't. And I think when we talked earlier about the standard compliance and applying the same baseline across the whole board of 1,400 controls, and that's what we're focused on for every system, no matter what it is, we're seeing more and more that that's not the most applicable way to secure things, and we need to look at what the risk profile is of an individual system. If something's internet facing with an ability to move data up to regulated environments, that's a higher risk profile, and we're going to need to be more thorough and more secure. There's things that are hosted in different environments where there's a lot more defense in depth, and we can take risk and bring new technology in and have a little bit more opportunity space. So it comes down to really understanding not just the tech you're building, but the mission that it's supporting and why, and finding areas where you can take more risk to be early innovators and use technology more quickly and with a little bit more of an aggressive mindset than other areas.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, we ask this question a lot in a lot of different environments, and what's particular about the cyber landscape is that in order to ensure accuracy, we have to have speed. So it is a little bit of a different game here. And so really, when you think about accuracy, what you have to do is think about how we're building our processes and our governance and our control mechanisms from the very beginning to ensure we can act at speed, because that's obviously the only way we're going to be effective.
So as we, excuse me, as we close out, this is a very interesting and, again, dynamic space. As we lean to the left and be a little bit more proactive, there's some conversations and thoughts about rules of engagement and authorities in that space. I'm curious, what needs to evolve, if anything, or how does that going to look, or how are you thinking about it? I'm not sure exact way to frame it, but this is a new space that we're kind of leaning into to be more proactive and using these tools to be more proactive. So how do you think about that engagement and how you balance that nuance again in being proactive?
Yeah, so I'll talk about as far as rules of engagement go, we as a government, our policy change doesn't always keep pace with technology, and we've seen that. So I think that we are seeing more of a shift. We've seen folks talk today who are really working to ensure that policy and our regulatory organizations are working and thinking at the speed that IT is developed, and I think that's a big change for us. I still come across, I have some very, very diligent compliance officers in my organization, and they'll bring up policies that might be 15 years old, and sometimes I have to be like, well, what phone were you using when that was written? Like, how did you watch a movie when that was written? You went to Blockbuster, so that's not gonna work anymore. And so I think there's a need, I think, for the rules and the things being supported by the government to be flexible in the face of a technology landscape that's going to evolve quicker than it ever has before. I think there's probably people in my work who saw it coming. There's people who didn't see DeepSeek coming. We didn't know how quickly China would act, how many resources they had to build stuff, and now we saw it. We know how quickly. We know the rules are out of the door for some of these adversaries. So how do we ensure that we have a policy landscape that's flexible? And you all can help promote that through your roles and the partnerships that you have with government officials too.
I think that's a great point, because we think about the adversaries and they're not playing by the same rule book. That's very important to think about. Ashley, I'm going to give you the final word on this topic. Feel free to elaborate, but where do you think this needs to go to support the ability to be more leftward leaning and proactive?
Yeah, from industry's perspective, I think our role really is to support. And so that's to provide the government and our partners with the information that we have and the ability to work as safely as possible while still, again, moving quickly and accurately. And so, as much as we talk about culture and how we're building our organizations, I really see our role in that is to make sure that our employees understand the responsibility being given to them and that they do view their role as partners with government in order to be able to help them be successful.
All right. Well, fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun. Jen, Ashley, let's give them a round of applause for their time up here. They did a great job.